So we are live. Welcome to the Unsolicited Response Show. For those of you watching on LinkedIn or YouTube, and for the rest of you, you'll hear this on the podcast feed. My guest this week is Joel Langill, aka the SCADA hacker, who I think most of you know. Joel has done so many things in his career, but Joel, you semi-retired a couple years ago. Or actually a little over a year ago, you kind of semi-retired, which is kind of an interesting way. I think that's probably what I'll do once I stop working full-time. But when you're semi-retired, you can decide what's exciting enough to bring you back. So what do you find in the general field of OT security that interests you enough to say, I'm going to stop fishing or hunting for a little bit or fixing my cabin and do a little OT security?
Oh, yeah, thanks, Dale. Yeah, it's been a while since we've done one of these. I actually think the last one we did was during the Colonial Pipeline event when I was actually broadcasting from inside my tent while fishing. But it's interesting. So kind of a personal event happened in beginning of the summer of 2022. I lost my father, and he gave me the responsibility to take care of things. And I quickly learned that became quite a full-time job very fast. And that effort lasted about a year and a half, and now things are kind of in autopilot. But with that, it kind of made me start to reflect now and hit that transitional period. You know, I'm in my early 60s. I'll be 61 next month.
Youngster.
And now it's all more about both continuing to teach core skills. I am very devoted to the requirements that we have to have the equivalent of reading and writing and arithmetic in cybersecurity. And I see a lot of people starting up and spinning up a lot of entities in order to do that. But the problem is that since there's really no common criteria around curriculum development, they can go all over the place. And when it comes to industrial cybersecurity, OT, whatever you want to call it, ICS, SCADA, there's some absolute musts that I think people need to be taught. And what's really nice now is both the ability to develop very focused, customized training for clients, tend to be major companies. A couple months back, I did a big one out on the East Coast. That actually is a repeat event where we can bring in entire organizations. And what's really nice in those settings is to spend half the time training and half the time assessing. So taking what we learned in the training side and applying it to this company happened to make products. So we deployed some of the tools and techniques against the products that they were developing. And of course, everybody learns by doing more than you learn by reading or learn by reading or listening.
Well, I wanna dive into the training, but right before we get into the training, do you miss at all being on site, trudging around a refinery and getting your hands dirty and that stuff? Or is that you've done that so many times, it's not much fun anymore?
Well, it's always fun. The interesting thing is from 2016 to 2020, most of my effort was focused on public sector stuff, working primarily with the US military and intelligence community.
We lost you there, Joel. You're on mute. Let me unmute you. There, can you unmute yourself? Not yet. While Joel's figuring out his mute and unmute here, I want to let you know that we will take your comments and questions. I see some of you are online here. So we will take those comments and questions if you have them. And we're going to get into this, so I might as well introduce it now. One of the reasons why I wanted to have Joel on now is he has a new training course out. It is called, let's see here, Conducting Threat, Vulnerability, and Risk Assessments for ICS. And he is going to be teaching that at S4X25, February 11th through 13th in Tampa. So We wanted to talk about that, but also just he's kind of got a different take on training and workforce development. So that's really what kind of triggered this show. And Joel, I see you're back now.
Somehow it got.
Oh, we lost you there. You were up for a little bit until you put your AirPod in. No, I'm not hearing you. I don't see your mic is muted, but we're not hearing you. Well, this is the joy of live things here. Nope. Well, let me talk a little bit more about training. Joel, you just keep trying to talk, and when I hear you, I'll let you know. But so we've got 3 training courses at S4. They are the Sunday and Monday before the event. They so that would be February 9th and 10th down in Tampa. And the first one is Joe Fitzpatrick, Applied Hardware Attacks Embedded in IoT Systems. Joe is really a guru when it comes to attacking hardware. It's I asked a few people, you can probably guess who does a great job at this in hacking embedded devices. And Joe was the one they recommended. He teaches this course, this 2-day course at Black Hat every year. Save a little bit of money if you come to do it at S4, but it always sells out. So if you are into hardware hacking, I would say this is an advanced skills course. Check out the training page. It'll give you all the prerequisites, but we get a lot of very talented offensive type people at S4, and this would be a good course for them. The second course is Joe Slowick. He has a course called Cyber Threat Intel plus Detection Engineering and Threat Hunting. So he calls it CTI plus Death. And I think a lot of you know Joel. Joe, I'm sorry. We've got 3 Joes actually. 2 Joes and a Joel teaching these courses. So Joe was with Dragos for a long time, worked in his own thing for a little bit, is with MITRE now, but he still does this independent training. So we're excited to have him. And then the third course is the one we're here to talk about, Joel Langill, who I hear clicking a little bit in the back. So Joel, you might have found the solution.
Can you hear me now?
Hearing a little noise. Yes, I can hear you now.
Okay, so I'll go back to a handheld mic then, and I think we're good.
Okay.
Something happened with the Bluetooth.
Oh, that's okay. I wanted to tell people about the courses, so that was a good chance to do it. So Joel's course is called Conducting Threat, Vulnerability, and Risk Assessments for ICS. And this is, Joel, we'll have to get into a little bit how what you're going to do at S4 is the same and or different than what you do with your other courses at the Industrial Control System Cybersecurity Institute, which let me put out that icscsi.org. So if you're interested in that, you can check that out. But I lost Joel again.
Nope, I needed to get my mouse back.
Oh, okay. So Joel, I think the big thing I'd like to start with on the course, and I do this, I think about this a lot with my event, and I also think about it with training, and it's actually funny, we could go back. You remember the InfoSec Institute course?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I tried teaching for about 1 year and realized I'm a terrible trainer. And then Joel took over my stuff and improved it like 300% in the first year and taught it for a while. But one of the things that I really learned was sometimes it's hard to teach people with very different backgrounds all in the same course because they come to the course with different experience levels, different expectations and such. When you were putting this course together that you're going to teach at S4, what was the kind of the profile of the students you were thinking of? What kind of experience, what kind of job role, what kind of goals would they try to accomplish through the course?
Well, that's a good question. So it is a good history. When I took over the InfoSec class after Dale, and I kind of learned again, there was a huge span and capability coming in and the students from the various clients that we were using. So one of my first big customers when I went on my own after leaving working for, I was actually working for a systems integrator, was a pharmaceutical company. And when we sat down and started to develop what turned into a global cybersecurity initiative, we decided that up front we have to figure out how we can teach IT to OT folks and OT to IT folks. So when I started to put together the first class that launched in early 2001, the first modules were all about just that, to talk about what is information technology and how does it apply to things that people are probably a lot more familiar with. And then what is operational technology? What are the differences? How do we deal with protocols, system types, you know, um, operating systems, for instance? Windows isn't a very common platform when you get down into the low level ICS components like programmable controllers or DCS process controllers. So always the focus was to start off with foundational knowledge of both. And for me, and when I kind of mentor people that are coming up into the field out of high school and college, it's kind of like thinking about what CompTIA has, where they have A plus, Network plus, and Security plus. Kind of like trying to take all three of those and crunch them together. Because in order to really do threats, vulnerability, and risk assessment, you kind of have to have a pretty good understanding of what the system is, what functions it performs, and why it performs them. So when we talked about doing this class as a 2-day format, the focus on this was now to, rather than do the traditional 5-day class, a lot slower pace, would spend about 60% of the time on discussions, lectures, and case studies, and about 40% of the time hands-on. Taking it and shrinking it into a 2-day course is something that I've started to do over the past like 6 to 8 months, which is now teaching through doing rather than teaching through listening. So people come in and we sit down and we'll spend 15 minutes talking about something, but then 45 minutes or an hour actually applying it and doing the same thing that I would talk about, but actually doing it individually on what I will show in a minute is probably one of the most advanced cyber ranges for doing this, because it's not one of these programs where you bring your own computer and you spin up a single virtual machine and you do some very basic tasks. This environment allows every student to have their own sandbox SCADA system that consists of Active Directory servers and Office computers, programmable controllers, SCADA servers, historians, and all of these different components to start to go through the concepts of being able to look at a system, categorize and characterize that system, understand how to develop data flows, which from a security point of view is going to be very important. And then most importantly, how to evaluate it for weaknesses and calculate risk scores and mitigations. Because that's one thing, and it's kind of interesting when you look. I've got a colleague, he was kind of a mentor when I started in cyber when I worked for Honeywell, that's out of the Amsterdam office. His first name's Sinclair. Most people on LinkedIn in this space know him. We really felt strongly about the concept that cybersecurity is all about risk management. And if you can't successfully identify and quantify risk, how can you successfully deploy and manage cybersecurity controls? And that's one thing right now that's probably the biggest discriminatory factor in the space, is that there are those that want to try to apply a standard like NIST 853 or even IEC ISA 62443 like -3-3. The problem is that it's very, very expansive. I mean, you can go from one that has like 70, 90 controls to something like NIST that has 400 plus controls. And you're kind of back into this space. So why exactly are you deploying controls and what are you trying to do with them? So
yeah. Well, let me just let's jump in though. I mean, first let me put up this. You got a nice testimonial here. Someone who really liked your training. So let the audience see that. And I've heard a lot of positive comments about your trainings over the years. You've been doing this for a long time, various structures, various courses. But if I go back to that basic question, someone's attending S4 or going to look to go to your courses when they're in Green Bay or wherever you choose to hold them, is it an engineer or technician who understands their own system very well? You know, they're the person that when someone is called, when they have a problem, they're called to fix it. You know, those people in the plants, kind of the key one or two people that deal with all the problems. Is it the maybe IT/OT security professional who understands a lot about routers and firewalls and remote access and logs and Active Directory, but wants to get a little bit smarter on process? Is it someone brand new who doesn't know either of those? What do you see as like a profile for the person who should come to this? Who would get the most out of it?
The one in S4 is really designed for all of those people. Learned a lot last year. Last year we had a great event. With over half the people, it was their first time. There was a lot of very young and fresh individuals that are new to the space. So this is really going to be designed equally for them. Now, somebody that's been doing cybersecurity for years might find this to be remedial, but I'm hoping that the skills that they learn will prove that to be wrong, because what you're going to learn are things that, again, as I listen and I read and I look at people's work, I tend to see a lot of gaps, like people performing security assessments on systems, and the word risk isn't mentioned anywhere in their document. And when it comes to assessing a security position, it has to be based on alignment with the client's risk tolerance and risk exposure. And having spent 20 plus years working around the world in most of the developing nations, when I would work at an oil refinery in Saudi Arabia, their threat profile is very different than an exact similar refinery in Houston, Texas. That requires different strategies on how we would secure the infrastructure, depending on where they're at and all of both the internal and external factors that go along with that.
Okay. So you had a slide. Let's put up that slide if you've got it. Are you able to do that? The one that, oh no, I was talking about, oh, is this the one you wanted to show? Okay.
Well, I can go back.
Yeah, you had kind of a headline slide that just kind of gave the course title and everything. But we actually have a question too, and I think this is important, and this is an area where you and I differ a little bit, I think. So maybe we'll just talk about that first. I think you have very strong opinions as to what training should be taught in this space. You know, I've read your comments. We've had face-to-face conversations on it. I guess my thinking is more of their position. Like, for example, we got this question in, you know, how does this differ from the SANS training and such? And we also have ISA training. We have Justin Searles training. We've got a lot of different trainings out there. We used to have a dearth of ICS security training. Now we have many, many courses. I actually was thinking at S4 maybe giving every trainer a table one afternoon so people could see all the training courses that are available. But I view it more as positioning. Like there are some people that I think would be better served by going to 410 and 515 than your course. But I would think there are other people that would be much better served going to your course. But let's try to address this. How would you compare your training to SANS training, and who would be a better fit for?
So that's a good question, Dale, because what I did when I was doing this work with the U.S. Department of Defense was created a training curriculum that was targeted at the role of the individual. So we broke it down into a class. There was about 5 or 6 different classes, because the one thing that, again, I call it the triangle of individuals that are involved in building an industrial facility. You have vendors that supply systems and equipment. You have asset owners in the end, and you have integrators that kind of put it all together. So for me, I built around a curriculum that realizes, and this is one of the big differentiators between my direction and SANS,
what I teach somebody that engineers a control system is very different than what I would teach somebody that uses a control system or maintains and supports it. So the program that was developed for DoD focused on, okay, so people that are doing maintenance and support, there's one set, and what they would call them, it was all based on the government. Each of the branches of government had these universal task lists, so that for a given role, you have to be able to do these specific tasks. So the training curriculum was built around tasks. So what does a service person do? So a service person doesn't typically procure new systems. They're responsible for maintaining them, whether they're in-house people or managed through service contracts and so on. Very different than an engineer. But then we start to bring in the external people like procurement. Where's procurement in all these discussions? Because again, 20 years into this, I still rarely read purchasing documents that quantify security as part of the base requirements for the system. And again, I can talk about the government because of their purchasing structure, they fail to do that because it could be a huge disqualifier of vendors. And that's kind of against the whole FARs and associated regulations around how we procure systems. So for me, I wholeheartedly endorse the SANS program. As everybody knows, and I'm not ashamed to say it, the fact that they call it a professional certification is a bit offensive to me because most professional certifications require actual experience, like a CISSP, or I'm a functional safety engineer. In order for me to be a functional safety engineer, I had to have years of experience in engineering and deploying functional safety systems, or SIS. Another good example is something like a PMP, a project management professional. Again, that P on the end signifies that you actually have experience in the field. So that's one of the big differentiators. I believe that SANS is a very good basis of knowledge training course. But what I don't think it teaches is security from an operational perspective. It doesn't teach you how to go in, characterize, quantify, create risk evaluations, and provide recommendations for remediation and long-term support of systems. So I call theirs more of a knowledge-based program, where my programs are all operational based. So I'm focusing on operational skills that the day after you leave the training, you actually can go back to your job and do something with it to help quantify, maybe improve your risk posture, so on and so forth.
Okay. Can you make yourself big again so people can see you a little better? And I don't have you off the screen. There we go.
There we go.
If we look at the title of this course, Conducting Threat, Vulnerability, and Risk Assessments for ICS, and you have 2 days, so it's always a challenge, I think. How much time are you spending telling people this is what an ICS system is, this is what's important, and how much are you talking about methodology to conduct those types of assessments in an ICS environment?
Well, here's the one good thing. And when we decided to do this program, the one thing that I am going to do is, as soon as you, Dale, release the names and email addresses of the attendees, I'm automatically enrolling them in the Fundamentals Online course, of which I see a couple of the students that are enrolled in it now on the chat. They're going to get access to the full program with the associated textbook, right? Because I have a textbook with my class, so that they can then get started on the online course modules, learning some of those fundamentals. Because the purpose of the class wasn't to teach SCADA fundamentals.
Okay.
We're going to have fun. We're going to do, and again, once we get through, I'll kind of show that architecture. We're going to actually walk through an architecture and learn by doing. Plus, hopefully some people will have spent, it would be nice to put in a good 4 to 8 hours to get through a couple modules on the online course. So then when you come in, you've at least been exposed to that basis. Because again, what's in the online course is the lecture components behind all of the lab exercises that we're going to do in the 2 days. So the 2-day course is probably, if we call it, we won't say it's 16 hours. It's more like probably 10 to 12 hours.
Right.
So at 12 hours, we're going to spend about 6 to 8 hours on exercises and then 4 or so on actual discussions and talking. And the reason I do that is it's kind of fun to teach through case studies as well. But again, we're going to learn a lot of cool things. Got some real applications, some real systems to actually put our hands on and play around with, and hopefully get an appreciation, if you've never really seen an ICS, how complicated they are, as well as learning some basic skills that you can go home. And what I encourage people to do, and I'll show some neat little tools that are out, is starting to do them on your own systems in your home. It's a great place to learn and practice. The skills are the same and the tools are the same, and you'll be shocked what you'll probably find.
Yeah, I choose not to play around with my solar system. I need it too much. I'm afraid I'll break something. Maybe if I was 30 years ago when I was a little more technical, I would be a little bolder. But the way you explained that was really helpful, because then tell me if I'm getting this right. I'm hearing for this 2-day course, you could be someone with minimal ICS experience, but then you have to commit to doing some of that fundamental work before you show up in the class to get the most out of the class. Or you could be someone who is more experienced with ICS, but really wants to focus on the threat, vulnerability, and risk assessment part, to learn how you believe it should be done, with more of an engineer's mindset and a risk and system mindset. Is that right? Or can it fit both types?
I believe so, without any trouble. What was really cool was when this concept was first launched, the ideal class size was usually somewhere between 16 and 20 people, because I believe, and again, I started teaching as a teaching assistant in college, so we're going back to the 80s. People tend to learn more effectively when they're working together as opposed to working alone. Because what I've seen when people try to do this in a silo is they can get stuck on something and end up wasting all of their time on a insignificant event that somebody else might have been able to say, hey, by the way, you're misspelling that command. Rather than sitting there going, it's not working, it's not working, it's not working. And I really do got the best, and I will give everybody the firsthand chance to experience that, is using Tenable's Nessus professional package, because it is a very, very, very valuable tool. But in order to use it, you have to make sure that you know how to run it correctly against your assets. And in teaching this class, both at the university level and up and out in the public, that's one thing that's very funny, because people will run the tool and they didn't run it correctly and they'll think everything's rosy, or they'll get no data at all. So we're very flexible.
Yeah, I think one thing that was interesting and the little bit of teaching I had, sometimes at InfoSec Institute, I had one guy, I won't mention his name here, who probably had more cybersecurity experience than, he was top 1% in the world, and he came to this class. So when we were talking about firewall rules and segmentation and things like that, he didn't get a whole lot out of that. He could have taught that better than I could have. But there's something about it, if you want to experience being with a bunch of OT engineers and technicians who come to the course, he really got a lot of interacting with the other students. Like you said, in these groups, it's like, oh, that's how they think. That's what the culture they had. And he learned a lot through that. We have a question here from Alan asking about, what is the level of the lab environment? Is it focused on a particular sector?
Okay, absolutely not. So if you let me go back to my bigger screen.
Sure. Let me just, this is where producer Liz not being here makes it a little less smooth. Oop, I actually made that backwards. But I'll get you up here in 1 second. There we go. Okay.
So this architecture was actually modeled after the Dragonfly events that occurred in 2010, 2011. And what it did was it actually focused on an external based event that then was able to transform itself and masquerade through the architecture as though it was an authenticated individual. And when I kind of say those few things, what should come to mind in a lot of people's heads is what happened with the Experian breach. They had a vulnerability in their server infrastructure, their public internet facing server infrastructure. It was exploited in a matter of hours from when the vulnerability came out versus when the patch was released. But once they were in, they did all of the secrets of the trade. They established persistence. They then masqueraded as an authenticated local user and went round and round and round the architecture and caused havoc. This exact same scenario was used in the Ashley Madison breach that occurred a while back. It happens continually and over again. So the last thing that kind of set me off on building this architecture this way was I would do some work, and I was working with a foreign government over in Indo-PACOM. And I started the presentation. I was working closely with Waterfall Security and their team. And I would put in a Cisco firewall, and then I would put 2 computers on either side. And I would show how here's a lockdown firewall. Nothing from the internet comes in. Here's this workstation on the inside. And boom, showed how some stupid event created an outgoing package that was then able to be manipulated to create covert inbound traffic that they weren't able to see, because from their monitoring perspective, they thought it was all HTTPS traffic. And here we go in the scenario. So I took a simple 3-zone architecture, right? So I'm assuming people understand why we don't do flat architectures now. That's pretty old news. So I start with a very hierarchical architecture that, of course, in the office, you've got users that have computers and special needs, usually a big department, and external connections to the internet. But from that point forward, there's no external connections. So the first level down, I leave out the DMZ for simplicity, is we go down into kind of the information network, or I call it the production network within the SCADA system. And it connected to that is my Active Directory infrastructure. And then also are the SCADA components, the HMI and the SCADA server.
Okay.
And then below that is a locked in restricted network with, you'll notice there is a firewall connection between green and blue, but there's no connectivity between red and green. So we start the class off with how this attack happened and how I was able to breach the whole thing because of one goof in the office. And then using chained exploits, where one exploit uses the initial to create another exploit. So they're kind of all daisy chains. So you get a very complicated stack of exploitations. So when I used to do this live, if I didn't do it fast enough, it could kind of collapse on itself. But so I'm using some easy off-the-shelf packages. So, and what's nice is everything that we use in the class, people can download and use on their own. So for instance, I really like the Schneider IGSS SCADA package. It's pretty easy to use. You get a free 50-point license. And most importantly, you get access to the driver library for PLCs that a lot of other ones like Indasoft and, Wonderware and Rockwell's packages like PampPacks, they don't give those to you for free. You have to buy them. And then over on the other side, we've got Active Directory. So people that are unfamiliar with Microsoft servers, we get a little time there. And then on the bottom, we've got a little PLC. It's a little WAGO PLC where we can have a lot of fun exploiting it. But what I teach, and I'll end it real fast, is that you're going to learn in this class that the device that we have very difficult time securing, the PLC, actually doesn't have a single vulnerability in this attack. And that's the gotcha. And what we try to do when we do this risk assessment is understand that, as a matter of fact, if you can successfully compromise the Active Directory server because of the architecture, you tend to not need vulnerabilities from that point down, because we're taking advantage of the way most people deploy infrastructure.
And just to close the loop on that question, is it any sector specific? I mean, is this going to be more useful for manufacturing than water, than pipeline, or is this kind of a cross applicable?
Completely generic.
Okay.
I mean, the graphic that I use that we see is a little level control on a compressor station, but the skills and the products, very diversified. I mean,
Okay.
and most people that are in this space, like IGSS was a Denmark company that Schneider acquired several years back. They really focused on things like water districts, but it doesn't matter. You can use it for anything you want. We could replace any control system. And to be very, transparent, I pick systems that have some vulnerabilities that are available in Nessus for you to see so that you can exploit them in the hacking for ethical hacking class. That's kind of part 2 of this.
Okay. I'm going to keep Joel over just for a little more. So if you have any questions, go ahead and ask them. Joel, just, we had a question come in. Is this following the 62443 methodology? And if not, why not, or where does it differ?
Well, the reason is that I'll be very honest, doing security now for 23 years, probably less than 5% of them use 62443. So I teach it agnostically because the controls library and so the methodology of conducting a risk assessment is not unique. I was a little disappointed in 62443-2-1. They pulled out their risk process because they were the only ones that really talked about a high-level risk assessment and a detailed risk assessment. So they kind of put it to the appendix of the document. And I was very disappointed with that because that was one of the big differentiators. But risk management is a pretty straightforward process. And I try to teach it so that it's applicable anywhere in the world. 62443 is gaining acceptance, but we still are faced with standards like this 27,000 series, far greater acceptance of that. So you have to be flexible enough that you could say, okay, we can look at 27,000 and some of its subparts that have now been developed for OT. So we keep it standard agnostic because skills don't require a standard. The formalization of an individual process does. And again, we keep standards out of it. In the course, there is, and with the people that sign up for the 2-day training will get the full course, there is a module on standards that'll walk you through most of those leading standards. And me personally, I think the best document out there is the one that was developed by the Australian Department of Defense. It used to be called their 20, but then now most people know it by the Essential 8. They were the first ones that looked at security controls in terms of a lot of different qualitative factors, like acceptance by user or operational expense versus capital expense. And they also broke it down. They were the first, and we're starting to see things like the Center for Internet Security start to move that way. But they look at all phases of an attack: preventing an attack, detecting the attack, managing and containing the consequences, and then finally remediation. So when you look at their controls, they try to develop controls that cover all and also all the asset types. So you learn a lot of neat things in the course because, again, we want to take the skills and say, oh, I can easily apply that. If I would do anyone today, it would be a toss-up between the CIS controls or NIST CSF 2.0, because they're really starting to get pretty close. And the reason the CSF is nice because you can really apply that to any controls catalog you want. I mean, they have like 5 or 6, but you could certainly apply a lot of other ones if you wanted to, depending on where you're at in the world. Because I don't want to discredit. There are some countries like Germany and some of the countries in the GCC in the Middle East. They have some very advanced cybersecurity standards. BSI's done a wonderful job. It's nice that they're starting to push a lot of that stuff through their supply chain. Same thing with what we're doing in the Middle East.
62443 is funny. I have this kind of interesting relationship with them because I'm always criticizing them. but I rarely criticize their content. I don't agree with all of it. But I think it's a really solid body of work that is just terribly marketed. And they have the 62443 training classes as well. And we tried to get, I said, well, those get so little attention, for the quality of the work and what the training that could be put behind that. So I tried to give them a little push and tried to get them down to S4 to do one or two of their courses down there. But no interest. They're kind of in this mid zone between SANS and someone like you. SANS has a very rigorous process in which they create courseware, certify trainers. It's a very professional training organization that's been doing it for years. And then you have people like yourselves that have such a core of expertise that if you can get Joel teaching you, you almost don't care what it is. It's like, it's going to be great. There's a few, Brian Singer, for example, can teach like that too. There's a few people out there that are just so great. And I think the 62443 is in the middle where they haven't created this professional marketing juggernaut like SANS has, but they're too big to have the individual trainers. I've actually heard, kind of whispered to me that a 62443 class can be great or it can be not so great, depending on who your teacher is.
Agree.
And I really hope they get it together, because they always think that I'm anti 62443. What I'd like them to do is do a much better job getting this great content that they've developed over decades out there and used. So I guess that's just me on my soapbox. Feel free to comment on that, or I just kind of have just maybe take it bigger besides S4. Where do you see this? So let's say this course catches on. Are you going to be teaching this in person in Green Bay, around the world? Is it going to be primarily online? What do you see as kind of the future of your training?
Well, I prefer to do this live and in person. And it's tough to kind of, I set up classes and try to advertise when we're going to do live. I would rather people call me and say, can you come? And that's been very successful, doing customer focus, because then we can actually talk about a lot of things that I can't do in an unvetted public forum. And I prefer to keep it that way. We can do custom, because again, the class, there's lots of modules and we can pick and choose. And, like some people will call and say, can you teach a class on ransomware? I go, no, because, that's just the threat of the day, what I would say. And there's other things. But I wanted to spend 60 seconds on 62443. My biggest disappointment with 62443, and all of the committee, Johan and Kevin Staggs, and they're brilliant. The problem with 62443 is it's like, okay, I want to do it. I want to deploy using it. So I want to go to security level 3, and I want to have my system meet security level 3. In order to do that, you have to buy equipment that has a capability of 3 or more. The problem is that nobody is certifying equipment. The masses are not certifying equipment against it. And that's what I think really hurts it, because you can say that you're deploying an SL3 architecture, but the biggest and best control system vendors in the world, none of them have anything higher than SL2. So how do we move forward? And that's where I think they're going to stall, is you got to get more, and it's very expensive to get that certification. And I think that hurts a lot of vendors.
I think they're going to stall and have stalled because the market moves like 10x faster than they do.
Right.
The market just isn't going to wait for 62443 guidance on things. But I was impressed to give them. Have you tried out their LLM yet? So they basically took all their content and it's in it's in like a Chat GPT sort of thing. I forget what they called it, but it's not bad. It's actually okay. Yeah. I mean, I again, it's like using any of these. You can't take it as authoritative, but it gives you a tremendous amount of pointers. So you can ask it a question about some technology and they'll say, oh, in this standard, it does this in this standard. So it saves you a lot of searching. I think it's much, much easier to say, I want to know about this little thing, how the standard treats it. So that's give them a rose. That's a very positive thing. As we close out here, Joel, is there anything else you wanna say about training in general or workforce development? I mean, that's kind of a big swath to end on, but is there any sort of thing that gets you off the lake that you want to talk about?
Well, the one thing I really want to stress is that I know COVID caused a big shift in how we view training, and a lot of it was done online. I think that you're probably going to get 20% out of a course online versus attending it live. You need the interaction, you need to build your network, and you need hands on exercises. And again, having done this, so the class first released in 2010, so we're now like 14 years into this. The one thing I learned over and over again was, people bring in their own computers to put, even though you put it in there, you have to have admin access. They come in and they don't have it. And now as we move into like Windows 11 platforms, it's getting harder and harder to do that. So that's why I tended to put everything in a range so that you interact with it just like you would if it was your own computer. But that then allows us to build very specific architectures. And there's a nice little appliance that comes with the range that I have that can actually drop it in somebody's, like, let's say they have a dev lab. We can drop the appliance in their dev lab, and then that equipment would then integrate in with the overall range so that all of the web-based tools that we use would be able to use what's in your dev lab plus what's in like my lab, where I've got probably 50 different component devices and 20 or 30 different systems that we can spin up and shut down. So you really do want live in-person classes. The prices aren't that different except for the training and living expenses, but the return on investment's much higher.
Well, I think the thing is, and it cuts both ways, they tend to be more time consuming because you're sitting blocks of time, but then you actually get more about, you tend to get more out of it because you're paying attention, right?
Right.
You're forced to focus for a long period of time. I'm actually curious if, when you were talking about doing these at companies, I could see huge advantages for asset owners of saying, I'm going to bring in training, whether it's yours or anyone else's, and I'm going to bring in disparate groups in my company, people from disparate groups in my company to come together, and you get the kind of the common level of knowledge, but also you just get that interaction. I think that's actually one of the things that INL's ICS, what is 310, I think it is, where they have red team, blue team. They get, I've always heard that's one of the big wins out of red team, blue team is when people send like one person from engineering and one person from IT security, and they both go through the same experience and they learn a lot. So I'm curious if that grows. The challenge is always taking, okay, we're going to take, let's say 15 people from our company and set them aside for 5 days for training. That's a huge investment in time and opportunity cost.
That's exactly what I've learned, and that's the exact feedback, especially from the management groups within the companies that I work with. 5 days is too much. It's hard to give somebody up for 5 days. So that's why, like this one that I did in the East Coast a month or so ago, 2 days was with a large group, the entire group of like 35, 40 people. And then the last 2 days were with a focus group of like 8. So
okay.
we were able to do things a little differently. Speaking about good old INL's red team, blue team, we've actually talked, me and them, excuse me, because the one thing I think they miss is if you've taken the class, 3.5 days are red team and a half a day is a light blue team. They need to teach more defense. Everybody teaches offense. So they teach you all the standard little tips and tricks, cross-site scripting and SQL injection and all of that kind, spoofing and man in the middle. But they don't teach any defenses, and they don't give you any defenses. When I took it, I actually brought a case of security appliances. So I took a waterfall. I took a waterfall gateway with me. I had a half a dozen Tofino firewalls, and I also had a bunch of network monitors in there that we could drop. And it was funny because they made me wait 4 or 5 hours before I could deploy them. But once we did, it was kind of interesting for what we could see.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's good. Well, Joel, I want to thank you for being on the show. People should check out Joel's site. It is icscsi.org. He's going to be doing a 2-day version of his training class. Get the title right here: Conducting Threat, Vulnerability, and Risk Assessments for ICS. But as we learned, if you were listening closely, it's kind of a 2 days plus, because you have access to information ahead of the class that can kind of get you up to speed if you're new to the area. And you can find out more about this at s4xevents.com. Joel, I appreciate you coming on the show and look forward to seeing you in a couple of months.
Yeah, thanks, Dale. And I just want to let everybody know, spread the word. And the good thing about doing this, I'm so glad Dale got training back to the events. We've got 3 other days together afterwards. And that's a lot of time where if there's some additional things you want to talk about or discuss, lots of plans and ability to do that when we're all together at a great event like S4.
Yeah, I mean, Joel is not the kind of guy who goes up to his hotel room and hibernates as soon as his teaching is done. You'll have no problem finding Joel and talking to him about any of the issues that you have. He's a font of knowledge, and you're very kind to share it with people when they have real questions to ask you. So thanks again, Joel, and thank you everyone who watched it live and the rest of you on the podcast. That's it for now.